July 15, 2006. It's early Saturday morning in Long Beach, California, an oceanfront city of almost 500,000.
Long Beach is the best of both worlds because it's got that city vibe, but then it's got some really nice beach areas and restaurants and some great tourist spots.
It also has some spots that aren't on any tourist's itinerary.
You've got a lot of industrial area around there, but it's got this character of blue-collar, working class.
You have this underbelly, you have all these socio-economic issues.
There is a, we'll say, seedy side with gangs and drugs and violence.
And as the sun comes up that morning, it shines a harsh light on Long Beach's unsavory side.
Are you okay?
The person that was jogging outside had noticed a woman's body on the ground.
But when he moves closer, the man realizes the woman isn't okay.
Oh, God.
The victim suffered a gunshot wound to the head.
The man who found her called 911. And when first responders arrived on the scene, they confirmed that she was dead.
But it's not until homicide detectives arrive on the scene that police are able to determine the dead woman's name.
She didn't have her ID on her.
We checked the missing persons cases.
And they find one in the vicinity that has just been reported.
The missing persons report matches the physical description of their victim.
The missing woman is 20-year-old Tyquisha Myers. Tyquisha Myers had grown up in Las Vegas, surrounded by a loving family.
She was very trusting. She seemed like she was always looking out for the best in people.
However, her life wasn't without challenges.
Tyquisha got pregnant at 14.
The child's father wasn't in the picture, but still, Tyquisha wanted to have the baby.
Being 14 and having a newborn baby and being a single parent, all of those were the odds kind of stacked up against her. You're focused on just trying to build friendships, build connection, learn who you are. And now you're thrust into parenthood to now begin to turn your focus onto this child. And not really knowing how to parent because she was just a child herself. That was a very challenging time for her.
But Tyquisha rose to the challenge by throwing herself fully into motherhood.
She was determined to do better and not just succumb to what she was experiencing. Because as a single parent, you kind of rise to the occasion and try to learn and do all the things so that you can succeed.
But there was still something missing.
She wanted a father figure in her son's life, someone to make their family complete.
And when her son was 6 years old, she found him, a man named Carl Mays.
Carl wished her off her feet.
The relationship moved fast.
Because it had to.
Well, I'm only gonna be in town for a couple more days.
Really? Carl was only in Las Vegas for fun. He lived in Long Beach.
Got a shop out there, barbershop.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
This is a man who's mature, who's situated and has some type of foundation, who has his own business.
The Black Barbershop is a huge part of the community. You can pretty much feel the pulse of the community, and usually the head barber knows everybody or everything about what's going on.
Carl also represented a huge opportunity for Tyquisha.
He was someone that she could build a relationship with and provide a father figure for her son. So it's like a lot of hopes and dreams that she kind of all had bottled up into this package called Carl.
Maybe I can come to Long Beach and visit you sometime?
Oh, I like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Tyquisha made several trips to see Carl in California.
That really excited her of the possibility for what she and her son could experience in moving here to Long Beach.
We're right by the ocean. We're chilling, we're vibing.
And by the beginning of 2006, Tyquisha had made California her home.
Carl asked Tyquisha to marry him, and she said yes.
It's just like, yes, let's jump into it. She's lived with her parents for such a long time. So now she's just wanting to break free and just make her own decisions. choose whatever it is that she wants to choose and have this freedom.
She was someone with so much future ahead of her.
But now it appears that Tyquisha will never have the opportunity to embrace that future.
Police get a radio call of someone reporting that the person was lying injured on the trail from a single gunshot wound.
The detectives respond to the crime scene, and then a crime scene is established where the victim or where the body was found.
The yellow tape goes up. No one's allowed to come close so that the forensic technicians can start taking pictures.
Tyquisha had been reported missing the day before by her husband. But does that mean he's off the hook?
You have a female that's murdered and dumped on the side of the freeway.
A gunshot wound to the head means it's personal.
We were all saying it's a really angry spouse that might have done it.
Twenty-year-old Las Vegas native Tyquisha Myers was ready to start a new chapter in her life.
She's lived with her parents for such a long time. She's wanting to venture out and start her own family.
She and her 6-year-old son were in the process of moving to Long Beach, California.
But she wouldn't be in Long Beach alone. Just a few months earlier, she'd met and married 28-year-old Carl Mays.
Carl ran his own barbershop in Long Beach.
Seeing this as an opportunity to just have this love and acceptance and have the support of a male figure who is mature, who is established, who has a job, and who seems to be self-sufficient.
Only now, Tyquisha's new beginning has come to a violent end.
Soon after Carl reported her missing, Tyquisha was found alongside a bike path, dead from a single gunshot wound to the head.
When you have a gunshot wound to the head, usually we call that an execution-style murder.
Somebody was pissed off, or it's a very violent individual who did it.
But who was it that pulled the trigger?
Based on how this crime occurred, just the nature of it, you're gonna look for that maybe heat of passion suspect.
Leaving CSI and the coroner's team to finish processing the scene and remove the body for autopsy, the detectives decide it's time they talk to Tyquisha's husband, Carl.
The husband, the boyfriend, they're the first people you go to. Could it have been somebody else? Absolutely. But that's the first place you look.
From the scene, the detectives drive straight to Carl's barbershop.
Carl had provided his address to police when he filed the missing persons report.
Can I help you?
Yes. We're looking for Carl Mays.
Yes. Y'all find Tyquisha?
I'm afraid so.
Carl appears stunned by the news that Tyquisha is dead.
I can't believe it. I mean, I was worried, but just never imagined something like this.
Sir, when's the last time you saw your wife?
Yesterday, before she went out of town.
Carl explained that Tyquisha had been splitting her time between Long Beach and with her family in Vegas.
Why is that?
We were just working on some things.
What kind of things?
Married life, mostly.
After living her entire life at home, he says Tyquisha was having a hard time adjusting.
What to expect, what's expected of her, what to expect of others, all of that is something new that she possibly wasn't aware of because she was just 20 years old.
Carl said that Tyquisha had left her son with family in Vegas to come to Long Beach so that they could talk things over.
And she had dropped by the shop on her way back to Vegas.
Carl said she wanted some money that he owed her.
Did you give her the money?
Yeah, then she left. That was the last time I saw her.
Carl says he'd assumed Tyquisha had gone back to Las Vegas until he got a frantic call from her mother.
Her mama hadn't even heard from her, and nobody knew where she was, and it just didn't make any sense. So that's why I called the police.
To the detectives, Carl seems genuine, but they still need to rule him out.
Sir, do you own a gun?
No, I don't.
Do you mind if we look around a little bit?
Yeah, sure, whatever you need, that helps.
He seemed more than willing to cooperate with the investigation.
With Carl's permission, detectives searched the shop, including the back room.
There's no evidence of a gun.
But they do find something interesting.
This yours?
Yeah.
There's blood on it.
He said that the blood was there because he cut himself while he was working.
It seems plausible, but detectives want to make sure.
You mind if we take it with us?
And we'd like to run some tests.
Yeah, sure.
I'll bag it and take it to the cruiser.
Then, after talking to Carl, detectives talk to the other barber who works in the shop, a man named Harris Finley.
They start by asking him about Carl and Tyquisha's relationship.
When I think of a barber in a community like Long Beach, I think about a place where people are gonna talk about their lives and talk about their stories. Maybe there's a lot of joking, but maybe there's a lot of complaining.
Their instincts are right. Carl had told Harris a lot about his marriage.
He said they hit a rough patch, but they're putting things back together.
Did he say what the problem was?
Mostly that they got married too fast.
Harris also tells them he was at the barber shop when Tyquisha came by to see Carl.
Do you know what it was about?
I think she wanted some money.
He said they went in the back and talked a while. And when they came out, Carl handed Tyquisha some cash.
Tell me when you get to Vegas.
Oh. He said she was only here for a few moments and she left, which backed up what Carl was sharing.
As a general rule, that's good evidence to rule that person out as a suspect.
The investigators were back at square one.
Detectives investigating Tyquisha Myers' murder have all but ruled out her husband, Carl Mays.
When they interviewed the barber that worked in the shop with Carl, he backed up what Carl was sharing.
So he gave her the money and she left.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what Carl had told them in his statement.
But the next morning, when detectives received the results of the autopsy, the findings indicate that the murder must have occurred soon after she left the shop.
The medical examiner places Tyquisha's time of death on the afternoon of the 14th.
To determine where she'd gone after she left the barber shop, the detectives subpoena Tyquisha's phone records.
Phone evidence is probably a lot better now, but in 2006, you could actually track someone by their phone.
Then, while waiting for Tyquisha's cell provider to respond to the subpoena, detectives reach out to her family in Las Vegas.
When they do, they learn that Tyquisha's mother is already in Long Beach.
After informing Tyquisha's mother that her daughter is dead, they arrange for her to come into the station and give them a statement.
First off, I want to say sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Assume you drove in from Las Vegas as soon as you realized she was missing.
No, I was already in town.
Tyquisha's mom said she and Tyquisha had been in the area for a few days prior to her disappearance.
She came back to attend a friend's funeral, but she still had issues with Carl that she had to settle.
What sort of issues?
Well, I think he owed her money.
Her statement echoes Carl's. However, Tyquisha's mom does add some new information about the day her daughter disappeared.
Tyquisha's mom dropped her off at the barbershop.
And she left with you?
No. She said she didn't know how long she would be.
She stated that Tyquisha was planning to see another friend in Long Beach after she left Carl's.
She said she would either get a ride with them or Carl would take her.
That was the last time she heard from her daughter.
Tyquisha's mother says she first realized something was wrong when Tyquisha wouldn't answer her phone.
I can just imagine trying to call and do all the checking to see what happened to her and not able to find her.
Tyquisha never answered. But the following morning, she'd gotten a hold of Carl.
She's not answering the phone?
No.
Okay, I can call the police.
To be honest, I was surprised that Carl offered.
Why is that?
Tyquisha and Carl were in this relationship where it didn't seem like it was going very well. They had some personal disputes.
Carl mentioned their issues when detectives spoke with him, but according to Tyquisha's mother, he hadn't told them the whole story.
The first time she came home after the wedding, I could tell there was trouble.
Her family says that she would show up with a lot of bruises.
They knew something was happening.
The mother wanted to put a stop to the relationship immediately.
But she says that Tyquisha denied the abuse, at least initially.
She said she fell or something. She always had an excuse.
It can be very hard for victims of domestic violence to come forth and be honest about what's happening to them. There can be a lot of embarrassment.
Eventually, Tyquisha had finally opened up and admitted the truth.
Tyquisha told her mother that Carl would sometimes lose his temper and get violent with her.
And Tyquisha's family finally convinced her to break things off, at least temporarily.
Tyquisha made the decision, from the support of her family and friends, to be able to put a pause on that relationship because she knew she deserved better.
She took her son and moved back to Las Vegas.
She made up her mind she was never going back to him.
So why'd she come back to see him then?
She just wanted the money he owed her.
She said that was supposed to be Tyquisha's last contact with Carl.
Had that final meetup cost Tyquisha her life? Or are the detectives missing something?
All you kind of have is Tyquisha's mother's word versus Carl's word.
He said she left.
And the other barber corroborated his story.
They're lying, both of them.
And according to Tyquisha's mom, she has proof.
She said that she was gonna give this to him, but she decided not to.
She had left a letter behind.
The note kind of details how hard life has been for her ever since she met Maze. One particular part details how it was a very controlling relationship.
But that wasn't all she said.
She actually indicated that she did not want to be around him and that she was happy to leave him.
She felt like she needed to escape.
The last thing that she wrote was that I was scared for my life.
Detectives investigating the murder of Tyquisha Myers have learned that she recently left her husband, Carl Mays, over emotional and physical abuse.
It's all detailed in a letter that Tyquisha's mother provided to detectives.
That note is a huge piece of evidence to paint a picture of their relationship.
And the last line of the letter all but names Carl as her killer.
Tyquisha closed the letter by stating, "I was scared for my life."
As an investigator, it really focuses your efforts into closing in on this person.
However, there's something standing between the detectives and an arrest. Carl's fellow barber, Harris Finley.
Harris told detectives that he was in the barbershop when Tyquisha dropped by.
He says that Carl gave her the money he owed her, and she left.
But now that they've read the letter she wrote, detectives aren't so sure.
Harris may have had reason to lie, too.
Carl was his employer, and so the reality is you're not going to mess up the way that you feed yourself or feed your family.
Harris could even be protecting himself.
If Carl had killed Tyquisha, maybe Harris helped get rid of the body.
There's suspicion of Carl mounting. Detectives do a little digging on Tyquisha's husband.
They're looking for previous crimes, any other history of domestic violence, restraining orders, things like that.
There's nothing in Carl's record as far as domestic violence or a restraining order. But the search does reveal something.
The year before, he was arrested for having a loaded firearm on his possession in public.
Tyquisha died from a single gunshot wound to the head.
But while the weapons charge raises detective suspicions, it's a long way from a murder charge.
The weapons charge only proved that he used to own a gun, not that he had one now. And the search of the barbershop hadn't produced any evidence of a gun either.
However, the detectives hope that one piece of evidence from the barbershop could be the breakthrough they need.
The investigators found a blanket that had blood on it.
At the time, Carl said the blood was his, but the detectives wanted to be sure.
They took it in for DNA.
The test results proved disappointing.
It came back as unconclusive.
Back in 2006, the technology just wasn't as refined as it is now.
But when detectives received Tyquisha's phone records, they further suggest that the murder did occur in the barbershop.
Cell phone records showed that was her last known location.
After that, there was no activity on Tyquisha's phone.
But the phone records alone aren't enough for an arrest.
There are so many frustrations because in your mind, you know that this is the person that most likely did this, but because of the lack of evidence, it's not a fileable case.
What detectives need is a confession.
The detectives brought Carl back in for questioning and confronted him with what Tyquisha's family said about the alleged abuse.
Any truth to that?
I mean, we could argue some.
But no violence?
I mean, some pushing and shoving, maybe. Her just as much as me, but no.
Carl also insists that things weren't over between them.
We were just taking a break for a little bit.
It's not what her family says.
Well, maybe she didn't tell her family everything.
He also insisted that Tyquisha left the barbershop alive, and that was the last contact that he ever had with her.
Harris was there. He saw her leave.
We know.
He maintains that he has nothing to hide.
He also gives the detectives permission to search his car.
Since she was found several miles from the barbershop, the detectives suspected that Carl may have used his car to move Tyquisha's body.
The search fails to turn up any blood or other evidence. And following up with Carl's co-worker, Harris Finley, is equally fruitless.
He maintains that Tyquisha left the shop alive.
It's very frustrating for detectives.
Unable to make an arrest, the case grows cold.
If you don't have any other leads, then there's nowhere to go.
It is extremely, extremely frustrating, and everybody feels for the family.
It's very hard on families. A lot of times, they don't understand what is really happening.
You feel like it's never going to be solved.
The frustrations only get worse as weeks turn to months and months into years.
It's a very, very challenging time for the family. They're trying to do the best that they can, trying to raise her son and just not having the answers.
However, the case is never officially closed.
You gotta have faith that somebody will find something and someone will be put to justice.
When homicide cases go cold, it can give people time to think. Witnesses, even suspects, lives change, their conscience gets the best of them, guilt kicks in.
Or they can get caught in a jam and need a little leverage.
Homicide.
In 2019, 13 years after Tyquisha's murder, Long Beach detectives get a call from a neighboring precinct.
They'd arrested a man on other charges, And when they started questioning him, he said that he had information to give them.
The man they had in custody was Carl's friend, Harris Finley.
It's been 13 years since someone shot and killed Tyquisha Myers and dumped her body along a bike path in Long Beach, California. And investigators have never made an arrest.
As long as the suspect is out there running free, the case stays open.
But now, detectives may have finally caught a break when Harris Finley is arrested on an unrelated charge.
13 years earlier, Harris had provided an alibi for Tyquisha's husband, Carl Mays.
Out of the blue, Harris had started talking about Tyquisha's murder.
Harris be like, hey, well, if I tell you this, would it potentially reduce my charges?
When police hear what Harris has to say, they reach out to the Long Beach detectives, who were anxious to talk to Carl's old co-worker.
When a witness comes forward after years of a case being cold, you take that statement.
Harris is booked on other charges while detectives drive over to interview him.
And this time, he has something very different to tell the detectives.
He said that Tyquisha never left the barbershop.
At least not alive.
Carl killed her.
Did you see him do it?
No, but I know he did it.
According to Harris, when Tyquisha stopped by the shop that day, she wasn't happy.
Where's my money, Carl?
I got it. Settle down, all right?
When Tyquisha enters the barbershop, they kind of start arguing a little bit.
He says Carl took Tyquisha into the back room of the barbershop to talk.
Did you happen to hear what they said?
Not really.
However, he says there was no mistaking what he heard next.
You're sure it was a gunshot?
Yeah.
Harris said that Carl came out of the back room a few minutes later.
What happened, man?
It was an accident. I didn't mean to do it.
Carl said that he tried to put the gun to her head, kind of to scare her.
He had no intention to take the shot, yet the gun went off.
Should we call the police?
No.
Carl said if anybody comes around asking any questions, you didn't hear anything, you didn't see anything, nothing happened.
Harris admits he'd done what Carl asked.
Why is that?
Because he had just killed someone.
We're talking about a witness that was in fear for his life.
But had that fear bought more than his silence?
You help him move the body?
Nah, man. I had nothing to do with any of that.
Detectives aren't sure if they believe him, but Harris's statement gives them the piece that they've been missing.
The witness statement matches the victim's injuries, matches how it could have happened, it matches the phone data, so everything is tied together.
But after 13 years of silence, can detectives believe him?
Oftentimes, suspects are just making things up, and clearly he has a motive to get out of whatever he was arrested for.
All those years, you could have gone to the police, you could have picked up the phone and made an anonymous tip, and you didn't. And the only time you decide to come up with this statement is when you're looking at potential incarceration.
Whether Harris is telling the truth or not, what to do with his new story isn't the detective's call.
You take that statement, and then as a detective, you give that information to the district attorney, and the DA is the one that has to convince the jury that what the witness is saying is true.
The prosecutors are open to cutting Harris a deal, but they're going to need something in return.
When somebody comes forward with this type of information, they're going to have to go the full length on ensuring that that information is used in the court case, which more than likely will be testifying.
Will his testimony alone be enough to ensure a conviction?
The defense attorney is gonna try to discredit your witness.
If the reason he didn't speak 13 years before is because he was afraid for his life, then what changed?
A vulnerability to cross-examination isn't the only weakness in Harris's story either.
That type of information is not the smoking gun in this case. It could help, but it's witness testimony, which tends to be low on the totem pole in terms of evidence.
Luckily, detectives have one more piece of the puzzle.
Back in 2006, the detectives had recovered a blood-stained blanket from the barbershop.
At the time, DNA testing had been unable to determine if the blood was Tyquisha's.
The capabilities of DNA testing have progressed quite a bit over the years.
But will a second round of testing confirm what detectives long suspected?
They ran it, did the test, and they were able to say this blanket had her blood.
That DNA, it actually sealed the case.
Years after Tyquisha Myers' murder, police and prosecutors believe they finally have enough evidence to make an arrest.
DNA testing has determined that the blood on the blanket found in Carl's barbershop belongs to Tyquisha.
And it isn't the only thing detectives have to connect Tyquisha's husband, Carl Mays, to her murder.
Carl's co-worker, Harris Finley, said he heard a gunshot after Carl took Tyquisha into the back room of the barbershop.
The witness statement is actually the icing on the cake.
On September 13th, 2019, detectives finally take Carl Mays into custody. But when they get him into the interview room, he still denies having anything to do with Tyquisha's death.
I'm the one that reported her missing. Why would I do that if I killed her?
Harris said you did it.
He heard the gunshot.
The detectives tell him that his former co-worker had changed his story.
He said that he's lying.
And the blood on the blanket, you said it was yours.
And we know that's a lie.
Now backed into a corner, detectives give Carl one more chance to come clean.
Come on, man. Do yourself a favor.
Somebody that's remorseful, or you get somebody that's confessed, that goes a long way.
But Carl is through talking.
No, I need my lawyer.
He asked for a lawyer, effectively ending the interview.
Even without a confession, detectives are able to book Carl on murder charges, and Tyquisha's family rejoices at the news.
It was a lot of crying and releasing of all of the emotion that has been building for those 13 years.
However, for the patrons of Carl's barbershop, the arrest comes as a shock.
When you're going to the barber shop and have a friendly face that you see all the time, you never picture that that person can take a life. And so it must be a scary thing for the community.
And when the case goes to trial, they're still wondering, is Carl a cold-blooded killer?
Once that person steps foot in the courtroom, all eyes are on them.
While Carl looks on from the defense table, the prosecutors lay out the case against him.
Prosecutors have to make sure that, they have enough evidence that the charges that they're presenting are going to stick.
They have the family's allegations of abuse, Tyquisha's phone records that last place her at the barbershop, and they have her blood on the blanket from Carl's storeroom.
They also have a star witness.
Harris Finley takes the stand and testifies that when Tyquisha came by the shop that day, Carl took her into the back room.
He recalls hearing a loud pop in the background and then Carl coming out.
But Tyquisha never came out.
Carl shot and killed her in that back room.
Harris doesn't know exactly why he did it, only that Carl and Tyquisha had been arguing over money.
However, the prosecution believes that money was only part of it.
I need my money, Carl.
If you wanted something from me, you should have stayed.
He could have been holding in some kind of anger or rage.
Until it suddenly and violently came boiling out.
Just give me my money, Carl.
Okay, I'll give you something.
That's when he shot her.
The DNA, the phone records, and Harris's testimony. According to the prosecutors, it all points to Carl as Tyquisha's killer.
Basically, they tied everything together in this neat little bow.
But when it's the defense's turn, Carl's attorney does his best to pull at any loose threads.
As the prosecutors predicted, the defense tried to discredit Harris Finley's testimony.
The defense in this case really focused on that.
May's attorney brought up how convenient it was for this guy who was facing charges for something unrelated to now bring up this murder 13 years later.
All the while, according to the defense, Tyquisha's real killer walked free.
What May's attorney was essentially trying to argue was that police dropped the ball again and again. They weren't diligent enough to go and find who actually did this.
When the case goes to the jury, they find Carl guilty of second-degree murder.
The reason you get second degree instead of first degree is because they just couldn't prove intent.
It might have been an intentional killing, but it might have been more in the heat of the moment.
The DA's office works off of the evidence that they can prove in court, and we're lucky they didn't get just manslaughter.
When it comes time for sentencing, the family argues in favor of the maximum sentence.
It's one thing for a crime to be a heat in the moment and you have immediate remorse, but it's another thing to not come forth and be honest about it. So there's a significant amount more of malicious intent.
And Tyquisha's mother had some harsh words for her daughter's killer.
Her mom pointed out that she wasn't gonna forgive him. He took her baby away from her, and that each year that he spends in jail, she hopes that haunts him.
But it's Tyquisha's own words that have the most impact.
Her sister took to the stand and read from the letter Tyquisha wrote to Carl prior to her death.
It was essentially describing in detail why she couldn't bear to continue the relationship with Mays and why she wanted this new life, this new start.
Carl appears unmoved by Tyquisha's words.
When the family was speaking, I don't think Carl really ever showed any remorse.
However, when the judge hands down his sentence, it appears that the family's passionate plea did have an impact.
He gives Carl the maximum sentence, 41 years to life.
Which means he'll be in his late 60s, early 70s, or even in his 80s before he comes up for parole. That's if he survives prison.
When the sentencing was handed down, it's finally over. It's been a long time coming, so there's a sense of relief.
The family also feels a sense of gratitude.
It's sad for the families to have to wait, but as long as that case is solved, then hopefully it gives the family some closure.
But even if Tyquisha finally has justice, her family still grieves her loss.
Her family and her friends have to live knowing that their loved one, their daughter, their sister, their friend, their mom, didn't get to be there with them, sharing the most precious moments of their lives.
You're never gonna get to see this person again. It's something that's gonna haunt the family.
The first thing people heard was not a scream. It was a blast so violent that it shattered the ordinary rhythm of a quiet afternoon in Phoenix. Windows trembled. Birds burst into the sky in frantic waves. For a brief second, conversations stopped in hotel corridors, traffic slowed, and strangers instinctively turned toward a column of gray smoke rising above the parking lot of the Clarendon Hotel. No one standing nearby could have known that they were witnessing a moment that would become one of the darkest chapters in the history of American journalism. The Chevrolet had been ordinary only seconds earlier. Parked beneath the relentless Arizona sun, it blended into a row of vehicles baking under the heat of early June. There had been nothing unusual about the man who walked toward it either. He wore the familiar expression of someone occupied by unfinished thoughts, carrying the invisible weight of questions that refused to leave him alone. To anyone watching from a distance, he looked like another businessman returning from lunch, another traveler preparing to leave, another middle-aged man ready to drive away. Then the earth seemed to split beneath him. The explosion tore through steel, glass, and flesh with terrifying precision. The driver's seat disappeared in an eruption of fire and twisted metal. Shards of chrome spun across the pavement like deadly rain. Smoke swallowed the car almost instantly, curling upward into the cloudless Arizona sky while fragments of shattered glass glittered on the asphalt like tiny diamonds. People ran toward the wreckage before fear convinced them to stop. Others froze where they stood, unable to understand what they were seeing. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Another voice screamed for the fire department. A woman covered her mouth with trembling hands, unable to look away from the burning vehicle. Inside the mangled wreckage, against every expectation, a man was still alive. His breathing came in uneven gasps. Blood pooled beneath what remained of the driver's compartment, spreading slowly across the pavement before disappearing into the cracks of the parking lot. The blast had destroyed almost everything around him, yet consciousness refused to let go. His name was Don Bowles. He was 47 years old. He was not a police officer. He was not a politician. He was not a mob boss. He carried no weapon except a notebook, a pen, and an unshakable belief that the truth mattered enough to risk everything. As emergency crews rushed toward the wrecked Chevrolet, no one knew whether the bomb had been intended to silence one man or to send a warning to an entire profession. That answer would remain buried beneath decades of conflicting testimony, overturned convictions, whispered allegations, and unanswered questions. Nearly 50 years later, investigators, journalists, historians, and ordinary citizens would still ask the same question. Who wanted Don Bowles dead badly enough to build a bomb beneath his seat? The answer would lead far beyond a hotel parking lot. It would travel through gambling parlors hidden behind respectable businesses, through luxury offices where million-dollar land deals were signed with polished smiles, through political campaigns funded by invisible hands, and through the quiet back rooms where organized crime rarely needed to raise its voice because everyone already understood the price of disobedience. To understand the murder, one first had to understand the city. Phoenix in the mid-1970s was a city growing faster than anyone could fully control. New neighborhoods pushed farther into the desert every month. Fresh concrete covered stretches of sand that had remained untouched for centuries. Developers promised endless prosperity. Investors arrived carrying briefcases full of contracts and dreams measured in acres rather than imagination. Money flowed through Arizona like an unexpected river. Where money gathered, power followed. Where power gathered, secrets flourished. Behind elegant office buildings and expensive country clubs, another Phoenix existed. It was quieter, harder to see, and infinitely more dangerous. Land speculation created fortunes overnight. Political influence could transform worthless desert into priceless property with a single vote. Gambling operations quietly expanded. Dog racing attracted enormous sums of cash. Familiar names appeared repeatedly inside confidential files. Businessmen dined with politicians. Politicians exchanged favors with influential financiers. Somewhere in the background, organized crime patiently watched opportunities multiply. Most people accepted the city's astonishing growth as proof of the American dream. A handful wondered what the dream truly cost. Even fewer dared to investigate. Don Bowles belonged to that tiny minority. He had built a career asking questions that others politely avoided. While many reporters focused on daily headlines that disappeared with the next morning's newspaper, Bowles became fascinated by connections hidden beneath the surface. He understood that corruption rarely announced itself openly. It hid inside paperwork. It disguised itself as legal transactions. It smiled during ribbon-cutting ceremonies while quietly rewriting the rules behind closed doors. His work demanded patience more than bravery. Hours became days. Days became months. Telephone calls produced half-truths. Anonymous letters appeared unexpectedly. Confidential meetings ended with more questions than answers. Sources changed their stories after receiving mysterious visits. Important documents vanished from filing cabinets. Every answer uncovered another layer of deception. Still, he continued. Friends noticed subtle changes. He became more cautious. He occasionally glanced over his shoulder before entering his car. He learned to recognize unfamiliar vehicles parked near his home. He understood that certain investigations made powerful people uncomfortable. Yet discomfort alone had never frightened him. He believed facts possessed a stubborn quality. Suppress one document, another eventually surfaced. Silence one witness, someone else developed a conscience. Delay the truth long enough, and history itself became another witness impossible to intimidate. That belief carried him through years of investigative reporting. It also placed him directly in the path of individuals who view truth as a threat rather than a public service. On the morning of June 2, 1976, the telephone rang. No one could have predicted that such an ordinary sound would alter the future of investigative journalism in America. The caller claimed to possess valuable information. Not rumors. Not gossip. Evidence. The conversation hinted at corruption reaching influential figures inside Arizona's expanding network of political and financial power. It touched upon land fraud, organized crime, and names already familiar to Don through years of reporting. For an investigative journalist, this was precisely the kind of lead impossible to ignore. The caller proposed a meeting. The location seemed public enough to feel safe. The Clarendon Hotel. Broad daylight. Nothing about the arrangement appeared extraordinary. Experienced reporters constantly met confidential sources. Restaurants, parking lots, hotel lounges, coffee shops, anonymous offices, it was simply part of the profession. Every important investigation depended upon people willing to speak quietly about matters they feared discussing publicly. Don accepted. He gathered his notes, reviewed the questions forming inside his mind, and prepared to meet someone who claimed to know far more than they wished to reveal over the telephone. The Arizona sun was already climbing higher as he drove toward the hotel. Heat shimmered above the pavement. The city continued its ordinary routine. Construction workers poured fresh concrete. Business executives hurried toward afternoon appointments. Families shopped. Children laughed somewhere beyond the busy streets. No one noticed the quiet countdown already underway. Somewhere, hidden beneath steel and upholstery, a carefully placed explosive device waited with absolute patience. Bombs possess no emotion. They do not hate. They do not fear. They simply wait until human intention transforms silence into devastation. When Don arrived at the Clarendon Hotel, nothing appeared unusual. Cars filled the parking lot. Guests entered through the front doors carrying suitcases. Employees moved through another predictable workday. He parked his Chevrolet and waited. Minutes passed. The person who had promised explosive information failed to appear. Perhaps they had become frightened. Perhaps they had changed their mind. Perhaps they had never intended to come at all. Investigative reporters grow accustomed to disappointment. Confidential sources frequently vanished before meetings. Last-minute cancellations happened. Fear often defeated courage. After waiting longer than expected, Don finally decided to leave. He walked back across the warm pavement toward his car, unaware that every ordinary step carried him closer to a trap designed with chilling precision. He opened the driver's door, sat behind the wheel, placed the key into the ignition. The engine came alive. He shifted into reverse. The Chevrolet began to move. Then, in less than the blink of an eye, someone else's decision reached its horrifying conclusion. The force of the explosion did not simply destroy a car. It fractured an illusion that many people in Arizona had clung to for years, the comforting belief that violence belonged somewhere else. Bombings were stories from distant cities, tales of organized crime in New York or Chicago, not something that erupted in broad daylight outside a well-known hotel in the heart of Phoenix. Yet in a single instant, the illusion vanished beneath fire, smoke, and twisted steel. The blast echoed through nearby buildings before dissolving into an eerie silence that lasted only a heartbeat. Then chaos rushed in from every direction. Hotel employees abandoned their desks and sprinted toward the parking lot. Guests stumbled outside, shielding their eyes from the harsh sunlight as thick smoke climbed into the desert sky. Drivers stopped in the middle of the road, unsure whether they had witnessed an accident, a gas explosion, or something far more sinister. Sirens had not yet begun their mournful chorus, but panic was already spreading faster than the smoke itself. The Chevrolet no longer resembled a vehicle. Its floor had been ripped apart from below, the metal peeled upward like paper. The windshield had disappeared entirely, leaving only jagged fragments clinging to the frame. One door hung open at an impossible angle while another had been thrown several yards away. The smell of burning gasoline mixed with scorched rubber and hot metal, creating an odor that many witnesses would remember for the rest of their lives. Some people instinctively ran toward the wreckage. Others remained frozen, unable to reconcile what their eyes were seeing. A man shouted that someone was trapped inside. Another warned everyone to stay back in case there was a second bomb. Confusion ruled every decision. Then someone caught sight of movement. Barely visible through the smoke, Don Bowles was still alive. The realization spread from one witness to another almost in disbelief. Survival seemed impossible after an explosion of that magnitude, yet rescuers could hear faint sounds coming from the driver's side of the ruined vehicle. Every second mattered. They rushed forward despite the heat radiating from the wreckage. What they found would haunt them forever. Don was conscious, though only barely. His body had suffered catastrophic injuries, but his mind was still fighting desperately to remain present. His breathing was shallow, interrupted by waves of unimaginable pain. Blood soaked the shattered remains of the driver's compartment, flowing beneath the vehicle and staining the sunlit pavement. The faces leaning over him reflected shock more than fear. No amount of ordinary first aid training prepared someone for injuries like these. Yet amid the confusion, one remarkable fact emerged. Don was trying to speak. His lips moved slowly. Every word demanded enormous effort. The rescuers leaned closer, desperate to understand him. They recognized immediately that this was no random accident. This man knew he had been targeted. Even as paramedics arrived and firefighters fought to secure the scene, the parking lot had already begun transforming into something larger than the site of a violent crime. It was becoming the starting point of a mystery that would stretch across generations. Within minutes, police officers established a perimeter around the hotel. Curious onlookers gathered behind hastily erected barriers. Detectives arriving at the scene immediately recognized signs inconsistent with a mechanical malfunction. The pattern of destruction pointed downward rather than outward. The center of the explosion originated beneath the driver's seat. Someone had planted a bomb. Someone had known exactly where Don Bowles would park. Someone had expected him to return to his car. The implications sent a chill through every experienced investigator at the scene. This had not been an impulsive act. It had required planning, surveillance, timing. Patience. The bomb had waited silently until the precise moment its target climbed behind the wheel. Whoever built it understood exactly what they were doing. As emergency crews lifted Don from the twisted wreckage, witnesses watched in stunned silence. Many expected him to lose consciousness before reaching the ambulance. Instead, he continued fighting to remain awake, as though driven by an urgent responsibility that outweighed even his own survival. The ambulance doors closed. The sirens finally began to wail. As the vehicle disappeared into Phoenix traffic, investigators remained behind, staring at a crater in the asphalt where a routine afternoon had exploded into history. News of the bombing spread through the city with astonishing speed. Police radios crackled continuously. Television stations interrupted scheduled programming. Newsrooms received frantic telephone calls from reporters rushing to confirm what had happened. Ironically, the victim was one of their own. Editors at the Arizona Republic struggled to comprehend the information arriving in fragmented bursts. An explosion. A parking lot. Don Bolles critically injured. Possible car bomb. For several long moments, disbelief overshadowed every other emotion. Journalists spend careers reporting tragedy. They rarely imagine becoming its central story. Across Phoenix, rumors multiplied faster than verified facts. Some claimed the explosion had resulted from faulty fuel lines. Others whispered about organized crime before investigators had even completed their first examination of the scene. The city's hidden anxieties suddenly surfaced. Names long associated with corruption began circulating quietly through offices, restaurants, and government buildings. Those who had followed Don's reporting understood immediately why many people feared the worst. He had spent years investigating powerful interests. He had challenged influential figures. He had refused to abandon stories simply because they became dangerous. Now he lay in a hospital fighting for his life. The timing felt impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Far away from the growing media frenzy, surgeons prepared for an operation unlike any they had hoped to perform that day. Inside the emergency room, medicine confronted devastation with determination. Doctors worked without pause. Nurses moved with practiced urgency. Every decision balanced hope against overwhelming injury. Outside the operating suite, family members, colleagues, and friends began arriving one after another, each carrying the same silent question that no physician could answer with certainty. Would Don survive? The next 11 days would become a battle fought not in courtrooms or police headquarters, but inside hospital walls where courage could be measured in heartbeats rather than headlines. Yet even before that battle truly began, another struggle had already taken shape beyond the hospital. Detectives were no longer investigating a bombing alone. They were investigating an attack on the freedom to ask dangerous questions. Someone had attempted to silence an investigative journalist forever. Whether they had succeeded would not depend solely upon the doctors trying to save Don Bolles. It would depend upon whether the truth he had spent years pursuing could survive the explosion that was meant to bury it forever, long before his name became associated with one of the most infamous murders in the history of American journalism. Don Bolles was simply a reporter who believed that every unanswered question deserved another phone call, another interview, another page of notes. He was not the loudest voice in a newsroom, nor was he the kind of journalist who chased celebrity or sought the spotlight. Those who worked beside him often remembered something quieter about him. He listened more than he spoke. While others hurried to meet deadlines, Don had a habit of lingering after interviews, allowing awkward silences to settle because he understood that people often revealed the most important truths only after they believed the conversation was over. The newsroom of the Arizona Republic reflected the organized chaos common to newspapers in the 1970s. Typewriters clattered endlessly from morning until long after sunset. Cigarette smoke drifted beneath fluorescent lights, softening the sharp edges of desks buried beneath stacks of paper, coffee cups, and marked-up drafts. Telephones rang constantly, each call carrying the possibility of either a routine assignment or a story capable of shaking the entire state. Among dozens of reporters moving through that noisy landscape, Don rarely drew attention to himself. He dressed conservatively. He spoke calmly. He carried a weathered notebook that seemed almost permanently attached to his hand. To someone meeting him for the first time, there was little to suggest that he had become one of Arizona's most persistent investigative journalists. His appearance lacked the dramatic confidence often associated with fictional reporters. There was no theatrical charisma, no carefully rehearsed speeches about exposing corruption. Instead, there was patience. Endless patience. It was patience that made powerful people underestimate him. Many assumed he was harmless. A polite man asking ordinary questions. Someone easily distracted by vague explanations or official statements. They often realized too late that Don remembered every inconsistency. Every contradiction found its way into his notebook. Every missing document became another reason to keep digging. His colleagues noticed the pattern long before the public did. When an investigation reached a dead end, Don rarely accepted defeat. He simply changed direction. If one source refused to speak, he found another. If records disappeared from one office, he searched for copies elsewhere. If a politician insisted that a transaction had been perfectly legal, Don quietly looked for the paperwork supporting that claim rather than accepting the reassurance at face value. He understood something fundamental about corruption. People willing to lie about one detail usually overlooked another. Truth rarely vanished completely. It merely became buried beneath enough paperwork, enough intimidation, or enough money that most people stopped searching. Don refused to stop. Arizona during the 1970s offered no shortage of stories for an investigative reporter willing to challenge influential figures. The state's explosive economic growth transformed dusty stretches of desert into valuable real estate almost overnight. Entire neighborhoods appeared where empty land had existed only months before. Developers promised prosperity. Investors celebrated unprecedented profits. Politicians praised Arizona as one of America's fastest-growing success stories. Behind those optimistic headlines, however, another story unfolded. Every parcel of land represented enormous financial opportunity. Every zoning decision created winners and losers. Every government contract attracted individuals eager to influence the outcome. As fortunes expanded, so did temptation. Don became increasingly fascinated by the relationships connecting businessmen, elected officials, lobbyists, financiers, and individuals whose names occasionally surfaced alongside organized crime investigations elsewhere in the country. Most reporters covered the visible events. Don preferred following invisible connections. He spent countless evenings inside public record offices, surrounded by filing cabinets and aging documents that most people considered unbearably dull. Deeds. Corporate registrations. Court filings. Financial disclosures. Property transfers. To Don, these papers told stories. Not dramatic stories filled with gunfire or high-speed chases. Quiet stories. Stories of signatures. Stories of ownership quietly changing hands. Stories of companies appearing only to disappear months later. Stories that revealed patterns invisible to everyone except those patient enough to compare hundreds of seemingly unrelated documents. Friends occasionally joked that he seemed happier inside a courthouse basement than at a social gathering. There was some truth in the observation. Don genuinely loved the process of discovering facts. The satisfaction came not from publishing accusations but from reaching conclusions supported by evidence impossible to dismiss. That discipline earned him respect among fellow journalists. It also earned him enemies. Powerful individuals rarely objected when newspapers reported crimes committed by strangers. They became far less enthusiastic when reporters investigated people accustomed to operating beyond public scrutiny. Over time, subtle warnings began appearing. A source suddenly stopped returning telephone calls after months of cooperation. An interview arranged days earlier was cancelled without explanation. People who once spoke freely became nervous whenever certain names entered the conversation. Occasionally someone lowered their voice and offered the same cautious advice. Be careful. They rarely explained exactly why. Perhaps they believed they were protecting him. Perhaps they feared saying more. Perhaps they themselves did not fully understand the forces gathering beneath Arizona's polished image. Don listened politely. Then he returned to work. His determination did not come from recklessness. Those who knew him understood the difference. He was fully aware that investigative reporting carried risks. Every experienced journalist recognized the possibility of lawsuits, public criticism, professional isolation, or political retaliation. Yet America was not supposed to be a place where reporters feared assassination for asking difficult questions. That assumption, shared by many journalists during the era, would eventually prove tragically fragile. Outside the newsroom, Don valued ordinary routines. He enjoyed conversations that had nothing to do with politics or criminal investigations. Family remained an anchor amid the unpredictable demands of journalism. Friends remembered his dry sense of humor, his thoughtful observations, and his ability to remain composed even during stressful situations. Work consumed much of his attention, but it never entirely defined him. Still, journalism shaped the way he viewed the world. Even during casual conversations, curiosity quietly guided his thinking. Why did someone hesitate before answering? Why did a timeline fail to make sense? Why had two witnesses remembered the same event differently? These questions arose naturally, not because he distrusted everyone, but because experience had taught him that reality often hid beneath comfortable assumptions. As months turned into years, one investigation gradually began occupying more of his time than almost any other. It involved land deals, political influence, business partnerships, rumors of organized crime. None of those subjects were unusual individually. Together, however, they hinted at something much larger. Arizona's rapid expansion had created extraordinary wealth, and wealth attracted individuals eager to protect their interests by any means necessary. Don sensed that multiple stories were connected. The challenge lay in proving it. His notebook filled with names, addresses, telephone numbers, company records, fragments of conversations, anonymous tips. Some leads collapsed after careful examination. Others unexpectedly reinforced one another. Piece by piece, an intricate picture began emerging, though important sections remained frustratingly incomplete. That incompleteness bothered him. He disliked speculation. He preferred certainty. If evidence failed to support a conclusion, he continued searching rather than forcing facts to fit a theory. Ironically, that commitment to accuracy made his reporting even more dangerous. Unsupported accusations can be dismissed. Carefully documented investigations are much harder to ignore. Somewhere beyond the walls of the newsroom, people were paying attention to his work. Not readers. Not editors. People with reasons to hope certain stories would never be finished. At first, the signs remained almost invisible. A parked vehicle that appeared outside his office more than once. A stranger lingering slightly too long after a public meeting. Telephone conversations interrupted by unusual silence before the line disconnected. None of these incidents proved anything. Each could easily be dismissed as coincidence. Yet experienced investigative reporters develop instincts impossible to explain. Don occasionally sensed he was no longer working entirely unnoticed. Whether he spoke openly about those concerns remains uncertain. What is clear is that he did not abandon the investigations. If anything, his determination quietly deepened. He believed that unfinished questions demanded answers, especially when influential people seemed eager to prevent those answers from becoming public. He could not know that while he continued assembling fragments of truth inside his notebook, someone else might already have been assembling something far more deadly. Not evidence. Not documents. A plan to kill a man like Don Bowles could never rely on chance alone. It required more than anger. More than resentment over a newspaper article or an embarrassing headline. The person, or people, behind such a decision would need patience, resources, and confidence that the risks were worth taking. They would need to understand his routines, anticipate his movements, and believe that silencing one reporter would protect interests far larger than any single story. Don, meanwhile, continued to live according to habits that had become second nature after years in journalism. He arrived at the newsroom early more often than not. There was a certain peace in those first quiet moments before the telephones began ringing and editors started shouting across the room. He would pour himself a cup of coffee, leaf through newspapers from around the country, and underline articles that hinted at broader national trends. Organized crime investigations in Chicago. Political scandals in Washington. Real estate fraud in California. To most readers, they were unrelated headlines. To Don, they were reminders that corruption rarely respected state lines. Arizona was growing rapidly, attracting money from every direction. Investors, developers, businessmen, and political donors all saw opportunity in the expanding desert metropolis. Legitimate fortunes were certainly being made, but where vast sums of money moved quickly, less legitimate interests often followed. He understood that organized crime had evolved. It no longer relied solely on smoky backrooms, gambling dens, or violent street enforcers. By the 1970s, influence could wear an expensive suit. It could sit on corporate boards, finance development projects, and attend charity dinners alongside respected civic leaders. That transformation fascinated Don. It also made his investigations considerably more dangerous. The people he was examining were not impulsive criminals eager for public attention. They preferred invisibility, respectability, distance between themselves and any illegal activity. If violence became necessary, someone else carried it out. That separation made proving responsibility extraordinarily difficult. Even within the newsroom, not everyone fully understood the scope of what Don was pursuing. Investigative reporting often demanded secrecy. Revealing every lead too early risked frightening sources or alerting subjects before evidence could be secured. As a result, portions of his work existed almost entirely inside his own files. Folders accumulated inside cabinets. Notes filled legal pads. Names appeared beside arrows, circles, and question marks as he attempted to map relationships that no official document openly acknowledged. Sometimes colleagues glanced over his shoulder and saw little more than pages covered in handwriting that seemed meaningful only to him. Don rarely explained everything. Not because he distrusted fellow reporters, but because unfinished investigations remained fragile. One careless conversation could destroy months of patient work. Editors knew he was onto something significant. They simply didn't know exactly how significant. Outside the office, confidential meetings became increasingly common. They took place in restaurants where conversations blended into the surrounding noise. Inside parked cars. Across diner booths. Occasionally in hotel lobbies where strangers could come and go without attracting attention. Sources often arrived nervous. Some refused to give their names. Others insisted on speaking only briefly before disappearing again into ordinary life. One described suspicious business arrangements. Another hinted at political favors exchanged for lucrative development opportunities. Someone else mentioned connections reaching beyond Arizona. Each conversation added another small piece to a puzzle that still resisted completion. Don developed a reputation among sources for one particular quality. He never rushed them. If someone needed 20 minutes before feeling comfortable enough to speak honestly, he waited 20 minutes. If they changed their minds entirely, he thanked them politely and left. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Over time, that reputation opened doors unavailable to many reporters. People who feared exposure sometimes believed they could trust Don to distinguish between rumor and fact. They knew he would verify information before publishing it. They understood that he would protect confidential sources whenever possible. Those professional standards strengthened his credibility. Unfortunately, they also increased the value of the information flowing toward him. By the spring of 1976, the investigation occupying most of his attention had become increasingly sensitive. Conversations with confidential informants suggested that seemingly unrelated stories, land speculation, business partnerships, gambling interests, and influential political figures might all intersect in unexpected ways. Nothing was fully proven. Much remained speculative. But enough evidence existed to justify continued investigation. That persistence may have altered how certain individuals viewed him. There is no definitive record identifying the exact moment when concern transformed into conspiracy. History rarely provides such clarity. Instead, investigators would later reconstruct events through fragments, telephone records, witness statements, financial transactions, conflicting testimony, and recollections clouded by time. Some pieces fit neatly together. Others contradicted one another. The resulting picture remained incomplete. Yet one conclusion appeared increasingly difficult to avoid. Don Bolles was not chosen randomly. He had become a problem. Whether that problem threatened criminal organizations, corrupt business interests, political figures, or some combination of all three remains one of the central mysteries surrounding the case. The uncertainty itself became part of the tragedy. Unlike many homicide investigations driven by personal relationships, jealousy, or sudden violence, this case unfolded against a backdrop where motive extended far beyond individual emotion. It involved influence, money, power, information. Perhaps most dangerous of all, it involved the possibility that carefully hidden relationships might soon become public. Friends later reflected upon Don's final weeks with the painful clarity that hindsight often creates. They remembered conversations that had seemed perfectly ordinary at the time. Deadlines discussed over coffee. Plans for future reporting. Small jokes exchanged in newsroom hallways. None carried any obvious sign that catastrophe stood only days away. That is often the cruelest aspect of history. The final ordinary moments never announce themselves. No one realizes that a casual goodbye will become the last. No one recognizes that an unfinished notebook will someday become evidence. No one imagines that a routine appointment entered into a calendar will eventually be examined by investigators, historians, and journalists for decades afterward. Don certainly did not. He continued making calls, reviewing documents, following leads, preparing for the next interview, living according to the quiet discipline that had defined his career. Somewhere beyond his awareness, however, another timeline was unfolding. A different set of conversations. A different collection of decisions. Individuals whose identities remain debated even today may have been discussing not how to answer his questions, but how to ensure he could never ask another one. If that was indeed the decision, it represented far more than an attack on a single reporter. It was an attack on the idea that uncomfortable truths could be uncovered through persistence, evidence, and public accountability. Neither Don nor the people closest to him could yet see that larger picture. They saw only another week of work. Another promising lead. Another confidential meeting scheduled on the calendar. A meeting arranged for the morning of June 2, 1976. It sounded routine. A source claimed to possess information connected to land fraud, organized crime, and influential figures within Arizona. For an investigative reporter, opportunities like that could not simply be ignored. Don noted the location. The Clarendon Hotel. A public place. Broad daylight. It seemed like just another step in an investigation that had already consumed months of careful reporting. He had no reason to believe that someone else had already transformed that appointment into the final chapter of his life. The morning of June 2, 1976, arrived like countless other mornings in Phoenix. The desert sun wasted no time asserting itself. By mid-morning, heat shimmered above the asphalt, bending distant buildings into wavering silhouettes. Palm trees stood almost motionless in the dry air while commuters filled the streets with the familiar rhythm of another ordinary workday. Delivery trucks stopped outside office buildings. Secretaries unlocked glass doors. Construction crews gathered around blueprints before another day of transforming empty desert into expanding neighborhoods. Nothing about the city suggested that history was quietly moving toward one of its defining moments. For Don Bowles, the morning began with purpose. The telephone call he had received promised something every investigative reporter hopes for but rarely finds, a source claiming to possess information capable of connecting scattered pieces of a much larger puzzle. The conversation had been brief, cautious, and deliberately vague. The caller refused to explain everything over the phone, insisting that certain details were too sensitive to discuss unless they met face to face. That alone was not unusual. Anonymous informants often feared surveillance, retaliation, or exposure. Some exaggerated what they knew. Others disappeared before meetings ever took place. A few genuinely held information that could reshape entire investigations. Experience had taught Don not to dismiss any possibility too quickly. He gathered the notes already related to the investigation, reviewing names that had become increasingly familiar over recent months. Land transactions. Political connections. Business partnerships. Rumors linking influential individuals to criminal interests operating quietly behind Arizona's remarkable economic boom. The evidence remained incomplete. There were still gaps large enough to prevent publication. But if the mysterious caller truly possessed documentation, or first-hand knowledge, those missing pieces might finally begin falling into place. Inside the newsroom, colleagues moved through another busy morning, unaware that what appeared to be a routine interview would soon become something unimaginable. Newspapers always operated against the pressure of time. Editors debated headlines. Reporters chased interviews. Telephones rang almost continuously. Don behaved much as he always had. Calm. Methodical. Focused. If he felt excitement about the upcoming meeting, he did not display it dramatically. Years of investigative work had taught him that anticipation could easily become disappointment. Promising sources sometimes vanished without explanation. Important witnesses frequently lost their nerve. The safest approach was cautious optimism. He checked the address once more. The Clarendon Hotel. A public location. Easy to reach. Easy to leave. It appeared to offer exactly the kind of neutral setting where confidential conversations often occurred. Before leaving, he spoke briefly with colleagues about routine matters that now seem painfully ordinary in hindsight. Deadlines. Articles. Future assignments. No emotional farewell. No lingering conversation. Just another reporter stepping away from his desk to pursue another lead. Had anyone known what awaited him, perhaps someone would have suggested postponing the meeting. Perhaps another reporter would have insisted on accompanying him. Perhaps the appointment would never have happened at all. History offers no such opportunities. Once a moment has passed, it belongs only to memory. Don climbed into his Chevrolet and began driving across Phoenix. Traffic flowed steadily beneath the relentless Arizona sunlight. Radio stations played music that blended into the background of another uneventful day. At intersections, strangers waited patiently for green lights, each occupied by private concerns that had nothing to do with organized crime, political corruption, or investigative journalism. Somewhere among those ordinary vehicles, Don drove toward what he believed would be another interview. His notebook rested nearby. Pens. Documents. Questions carefully prepared for whoever had arranged the meeting. The drive itself was unremarkable. Nothing suggested danger. No obvious vehicle appeared to follow him. No warning arrived. No sudden realization interrupted his concentration. If someone had been watching, they remained invisible. If preparations had already been completed, there was nothing left for Don to notice. The Clarendon Hotel stood as a familiar landmark in Phoenix, welcoming travelers, business meetings, and afternoon lunches beneath the bright desert sky. Employees greeted guests entering through the lobby. Cars occupied much of the parking lot. The atmosphere reflected routine hospitality rather than hidden violence. Don arrived on time. Punctuality mattered in journalism. Sources willing to risk confidential meetings deserved respect. He parked his Chevrolet and stepped outside. The dry heat wrapped around him immediately. Somewhere nearby, sprinklers fought against the desert climate, leaving faint traces of moisture that evaporated almost as quickly as they appeared. Conversations drifted through the entrance as hotel guests checked in and out. Waitstaff carried trays toward the restaurant. Nothing seemed unusual. He waited. Minutes passed. He scanned the parking lot from time to time, expecting someone to approach. Perhaps a nervous businessman. Perhaps a frightened employee. Perhaps an anonymous intermediary unwilling to identify themselves until the last possible moment. Nobody came. The absence itself was not immediately alarming. Experienced reporters understood that confidential sources often hesitated. Fear had a way of disrupting carefully arranged meetings. Someone might have spotted a familiar face. Someone might have changed their mind after arriving nearby. Don remained patient. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became longer. Still nothing. He looked toward the hotel entrance once more. Guests continued walking in and out. A family loaded luggage into a station wagon. A businessman adjusted his tie while speaking with someone beside him. Employees carried on with ordinary responsibilities, entirely unaware that a deadly device rested only a short distance away beneath the floor of one parked automobile. Eventually, practicality replaced optimism. The source was not coming. Whether they had become frightened or had never intended to appear remained impossible to know. Don made the same decision countless reporters had made after unsuccessful meetings. He decided to leave. He turned toward his Chevrolet and walked across the parking lot with measured, unhurried steps. The sun reflected brightly from the windshield. Nothing about the vehicle appeared different. No broken window. No damaged tire. No visible sign that anyone had approached it. The bomb had been designed precisely for that purpose. To remain unseen. Hidden beneath the driver's seat, carefully secured where even a cautious glance around the exterior revealed nothing unusual. Metal concealed metal. Ordinary machinery concealed something infinitely more destructive. Someone had likely placed it there hours earlier. Perhaps during the night. Perhaps while the hotel parking lot gradually filled with vehicles belonging to guests who would never realize they had parked only feet away from an assassination waiting patiently beneath the Arizona sun. Don reached the driver's door. He unlocked it. Opened it. sat behind the wheel. For one brief moment, the world remained perfectly ordinary. He placed his notebook beside him, closed the door, inserted the key into the ignition. The familiar sound of the engine turning over filled the quiet interior. He adjusted his hands on the steering wheel almost automatically, shifted the transmission into reverse. The Chevrolet rolled backward only inches. Then the carefully planned silence ended. In the fraction of a second that followed, time seemed to lose its natural order. The explosion erupted from beneath the driver's seat with devastating force, driving upward through the floorboard before tearing outward in every direction. Steel twisted as though it were made of paper. Glass disintegrated into a cloud of razor-sharp fragments that flashed in the afternoon sunlight. The pressure wave slammed against nearby vehicles, rattled hotel windows, and rolled across the parking lot like invisible thunder. For those standing nearby, there was no warning. Only light. Then noise. Then chaos. A businessman walking toward the hotel entrance instinctively threw his arms over his head as debris rained onto the pavement around him. A woman unloading luggage stumbled backward, her suitcase slipping from her hand as she stared in disbelief at the burning wreck. Hotel employees rushed to the doors, stopping abruptly as smoke billowed into the air. The peaceful rhythm of an ordinary afternoon disappeared in an instant. The Chevrolet had become an unrecognizable mass of mangled metal. The driver's compartment was almost completely destroyed. The blast had ripped through the floor exactly where the explosive device had been hidden. Flames flickered beneath the shattered frame while smoke poured upward in thick, choking waves. Pieces of twisted steel lay scattered across the parking lot, some embedded in nearby cars, others resting silently on the scorched asphalt. For several seconds, no one moved. The sheer violence of the explosion left witnesses struggling to understand what they had just seen. Some assumed a gas tank had exploded. Others believed a mechanical failure had somehow triggered the blast. Then someone shouted, "There's a man inside." The spell of disbelief shattered. People rushed toward the wreckage despite the intense heat radiating from the vehicle. Others yelled for someone to call an ambulance. Hotel staff hurried to grab fire extinguishers while another employee ran toward the lobby telephone, desperately trying to reach emergency services. As the first witnesses approached, they expected to find a body. Instead, they found something almost impossible to comprehend. Don Bowles was still alive. Barely. His body had suffered catastrophic injuries, but consciousness had not yet surrendered. His breathing came in shallow, uneven gasps. Every movement seemed to require extraordinary effort. The blast had inflicted devastating trauma, yet his eyes remained open, searching the faces gathering around him. The expressions staring back at him reflected pure shock. No one present had ever imagined seeing injuries of such magnitude outside a battlefield. Several witnesses instinctively looked away. Others forced themselves to remain focused, determined to help however they could until professional rescuers arrived. One man carefully reached toward the wreckage, stopping only when the heat became unbearable. Another shouted repeatedly that firefighters were on their way. The smell hanging over the parking lot was unforgettable. Burning gasoline. Scorched rubber. Hot metal. Smoke. And the unmistakable scent of an explosion powerful enough to alter countless lives within a single heartbeat. Sirens finally pierced the heavy desert air. Police officers arrived first, immediately recognizing that something about the scene defied the appearance of an ordinary vehicle explosion. The damage originated beneath the driver's seat. The pattern of destruction suggested deliberate placement rather than accidental ignition. Experienced officers exchanged uneasy glances. This looked like a bomb. If that suspicion proved correct, Phoenix was no longer dealing with a tragic accident. It was confronting an assassination. Firefighters quickly extinguished the remaining flames while paramedics pushed through the growing crowd carrying emergency equipment. They worked with practiced urgency, communicating in short, precise instructions as they assessed injuries that seemed almost beyond medical comprehension. Don remained conscious. His determination to stay awake astonished everyone around him. Even through overwhelming pain, he appeared to understand that time was slipping away. The paramedics stabilized him as carefully as possible before preparing to move him from the wreckage. Every motion had to be deliberate. Every second mattered. Around them, detectives began securing the scene. Yellow tape stretched across sections of the parking lot. Witnesses were separated and asked to remain nearby. Photographers documented every fragment of twisted metal before anything could be disturbed. Already, investigators understood that every bolt, every piece of wiring, every scar burned into the asphalt might eventually become evidence. News traveled through Phoenix with astonishing speed. Police radio traffic intensified. Television stations interrupted scheduled programming. Inside newsrooms across Arizona, telephones rang almost continuously as editors struggled to verify reports that sounded too extraordinary to believe. An investigative reporter. A car bomb. Broad daylight. The victim identified as Don Bowles. At the Arizona Republic, disbelief spread through the newsroom. Many reporters initially assumed there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Car bombs belonged to stories filed from overseas conflicts or notorious organized crime strongholds. They were not supposed to become the lead story involving one of their own colleagues. Yet confirmation arrived quickly. Don had been critically injured. The explosion appeared intentional. No one knew whether he would survive. Outside the Clarendon Hotel, curious onlookers continued gathering despite police efforts to keep the area secure. Rumors multiplied almost immediately. Some whispered about organized crime. Others mentioned corruption investigations. A few recalled reading Don's recent articles and quietly wondered whether his reporting had finally crossed an invisible line. Detectives resisted speculation. Their job was evidence, not assumptions. Still, many of them privately recognized the disturbing implications already taking shape. Bombings required preparation, planning, knowledge of the victim's movements. Someone had almost certainly known Don would be there. Someone had expected him to return to his car after the meeting. Someone had chosen a method designed to leave little chance of survival. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle accelerated toward Good Samaritan Hospital, the parking lot gradually fell quieter. Only investigators remained inside the expanding crime scene. They knelt beside shattered fragments of steel, carefully collecting pieces of metal no larger than coins. A damaged section of wiring. Fragments of a triggering mechanism. Tiny clues scattered across blackened pavement. Each item represented another question. Who built the bomb? Who planted it? Who ordered it? Most importantly, why had an investigative journalist become the target of such calculated violence? Those questions would dominate headlines, courtrooms, and investigative files for decades to come. But at that moment, none of them mattered as much as the battle unfolding inside the speeding ambulance. Don Bowles was still alive. As long as he continued breathing, there remained hope, not only that he might survive, but that he might still provide investigators with the one thing every assassin fears most. The truth. The ambulance cut through Phoenix traffic with its lights flashing relentlessly beneath the unforgiving Arizona sun. Drivers pulled aside as the siren echoed across busy intersections, unaware that inside the speeding vehicle lay a man whose fate would soon become a national headline. Every passing second carried two separate battles. One belonged to the paramedics struggling to keep Don Bowles alive. The other had already begun miles behind them, where investigators stared at the smoking remains of a Chevrolet that had transformed an ordinary hotel parking lot into one of the most significant crime scenes in Arizona's history. Inside the ambulance, the atmosphere was tense but disciplined. The paramedics had seen severe injuries before. Highway collisions, industrial accidents, shootings, emergency medicine demanded composure in circumstances that overwhelmed everyone else. Yet even among experienced professionals, Don's conditions stood apart. His injuries were catastrophic. The explosion had struck upward with horrifying precision, concentrating nearly all of its force beneath the driver's seat. Every movement threatened to worsen already devastating trauma. Blood loss had become the immediate enemy. Oxygen flowed continuously as one paramedic monitored his breathing while another worked to stabilize what could be stabilized before they reached the hospital. Despite unimaginable pain, Don remained conscious. His eyelids fluttered. His breathing came in shallow, uneven rhythm. Every effort to speak appeared almost impossible. Yet he tried. The medical team leaned closer whenever his lips moved, understanding that critically injured victims often attempted to communicate information they believed essential. Whether it was a family member's name, an address, or something connected to the attack itself, every word mattered. Outside the ambulance windows, Phoenix continued its daily routine. Office workers crossed streets carrying briefcases. Children laughed on school playgrounds. Construction cranes swung slowly above expanding neighborhoods. Life continued almost untouched by the violence that had erupted only minutes earlier. Inside the ambulance, however, time seemed suspended. Every heartbeat became a victory. Every breath felt uncertain. Meanwhile, back at the Clarendon Hotel, detectives began the painstaking work that would occupy investigators for years. The first responsibility was simple. Protect the scene. Uniformed officers expanded the perimeter far beyond the destroyed vehicle. Curious spectators continued arriving, drawn by smoke visible from several blocks away and the growing number of police cars surrounding the parking lot. Television crews hurried to secure positions outside the barricades. Reporters, many of whom personally knew Don, found themselves covering a crime involving one of their own. Professional detachment suddenly became extraordinarily difficult. Crime scene investigators moved carefully across the blackened pavement. Nothing was considered too small. Every twisted fragment of steel was photographed before being collected. Every burn mark was measured. Every shattered piece of glass remained exactly where it had fallen until documented. The explosion had scattered evidence across a surprisingly wide area. Metal fragments rested beneath neighboring vehicles. Tiny sections of wiring lay almost hidden among broken glass. Bits of insulation clung to damaged pavement. Each object represented a potential answer waiting to be discovered. Experienced bomb technicians soon reached an unsettling conclusion. This had not been a crude homemade device assembled without planning. The explosive had been positioned deliberately beneath the driver's seat, where the upward force would inflict maximum damage upon the person behind the steering wheel. Its placement demonstrated knowledge, precision, intent. Whoever installed it understood exactly what they hoped to accomplish. Investigators immediately began asking practical questions. When had the bomb been placed? Where had Don parked before arriving at the hotel? Had anyone noticed suspicious activity around his Chevrolet? Could the device have been attached while the vehicle sat elsewhere earlier that morning? Witnesses were interviewed one after another. Some described hearing only the explosion. Others recalled seeing smoke before realizing a car had been destroyed. A hotel employee believed he had noticed an unfamiliar man walking through the parking lot earlier that morning but could provide only the vaguest description. Another witness remembered nothing unusual at all. As often happens during moments of extreme shock, memories varied dramatically. Some details contradicted one another. Others overlapped just enough to remain useful. Detectives recorded everything. Even observations that appeared insignificant could later become important once additional evidence emerged. Attention quickly shifted toward the meeting itself. Why had Don been at the Clarendon Hotel? Who had arranged the appointment? Investigators searched his belongings, recovering notes, personal effects, and documents that had survived the blast. Among them were references connected to ongoing investigative work involving land transactions, business interests, and politically sensitive subjects. Nothing immediately identified the anonymous caller. No business card. No signed letter. No obvious clue revealing who had persuaded Don to come. That absence troubled investigators almost immediately. If the telephone call had been genuine, perhaps the source had become frightened and never arrived. If the call itself had been part of the conspiracy, then Don had been deliberately lured into a carefully prepared trap. The distinction mattered enormously. One possibility suggested opportunity. The other suggested meticulous planning. Forensic specialists continued examining the wrecked Chevrolet throughout the afternoon. As damaged components were carefully removed, additional evidence reinforced their early conclusions. The explosion had originated beneath the driver's position. Sections of the vehicle's undercarriage displayed unmistakable blast patterns. Remnants of the triggering mechanism hinted that detonation had likely occurred remotely rather than through ignition alone. That finding widened the investigation considerably. If remote activation had been used, someone might have been nearby. Watching. Waiting. Patiently observing until Don returned to his car. The realization cast an unsettling shadow over every witness statement. Had the assassin stood inside the hotel? Across the street? Inside another parked vehicle? Had anyone unknowingly looked directly at the killer only moments before the explosion? No one could answer. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, investigators carefully reconstructed Don's final known movements. Telephone records. Work schedules. Witness interviews. Travel times. Each detail entered an expanding timeline that detectives hoped would expose even the smallest inconsistency. Every minute between the anonymous phone call and the explosion became critically important. Who knew about the meeting? Who benefited from Don's silence? Who possessed both the resources and the willingness to construct such a sophisticated attack? The list of possibilities remained disturbingly broad. Meanwhile, inside Good Samaritan Hospital, another team worked against time. Surgeons prepared operating rooms. Specialists gathered. Blood supplies were rushed into position. The injuries they confronted were unlike those seen in ordinary emergency cases. This was not simply a matter of repairing broken bones or stopping isolated wounds. The explosion had devastated multiple parts of Don's body simultaneously. Doctors understood immediately that saving his life would require extraordinary measures. Outside the operating suite, family members and colleagues began arriving in growing numbers. Faces reflected disbelief more than grief. Many still hoped that somehow, against overwhelming odds, Don would survive. No one yet imagined that his struggle would continue for 11 agonizing days, or that even if justice eventually reached some of those responsible, the larger mystery surrounding the bombing would remain unresolved for generations. The doors to the operating room closed, shutting out the growing crowd of anxious faces gathered in the hospital corridors. Inside, surgeons faced injuries that left little room for optimism. The explosion had inflicted catastrophic trauma throughout Don Bowles' lower body. Bone, muscle, blood vessels, and internal organs had all suffered devastating damage. Every member of the surgical team understood that this was no longer simply an operation. It was a desperate attempt to keep a man alive against overwhelming odds. The procedures lasted for hours. Doctors worked methodically, making impossible decisions under relentless pressure. Massive blood loss had to be controlled immediately. Damaged tissue could not be saved. Limbs too severely destroyed by the blast would have to be removed if there was any hope of preventing further complications. Outside, time moved painfully slowly. Family members sat in silence, interrupted only by occasional updates from exhausted physicians. Friends embraced without speaking. Colleagues from the Arizona Republic arrived one after another, many still wearing office clothes, their notebooks tucked absent-mindedly beneath their arms as if they had rushed directly from the newsroom. None of them knew what to say. Reporters were accustomed to asking questions. Now they had none that could ease the uncertainty. Across Phoenix, the bombing rapidly became the dominant story. Radio stations interrupted scheduled programming with breaking news bulletins. Evening television broadcasts opened with aerial footage of the Clarendon Hotel parking lot, where investigators continued working beneath powerful floodlights. Newspapers across Arizona prepared emergency editions while national wire services began transmitting reports to newsrooms throughout the United States. The story carried an unsettling weight. An investigative journalist had not simply been killed in an accident. He had been targeted. The distinction changed everything. Within hours, detectives from multiple agencies joined the investigation. Specialists in explosives examined every recovered fragment, hoping to identify the type of device used and perhaps even the individual who had assembled it. Laboratory technicians catalogued tiny pieces of metal no larger than fingernails. Burn patterns were photographed repeatedly from different angles. Every measurement, every sample, every observation was carefully documented. Bomb investigations often begin with destruction. Ironically, they depend upon the smallest surviving details. A fragment of wire. Part of a battery. An unusual solder joint. A distinctive explosive compound. Any one of those pieces might eventually point toward the bomb maker. Investigators soon confirmed that the device had been deliberately attached beneath the driver's seat and engineered to direct its force upward. It was not the work of an amateur experimenting with crude materials. Whoever constructed it possessed enough knowledge to maximize lethality while minimizing the chance of premature discovery. That realization narrowed one question while expanding countless others. This had required planning. Careful planning. Someone had selected the location. Someone had known Don would return to that vehicle. Someone had waited until the exact moment to trigger the explosion. The investigation could no longer focus solely on identifying the person who built the bomb. It had to uncover everyone involved. Detectives returned repeatedly to the anonymous telephone call. It had become the center of the timeline. Who made it? Where had it originated? Could telephone records identify the caller? In 1976, tracing calls was neither immediate nor simple. Technology offered far fewer investigative tools than modern detectives would later enjoy. Many answers depended upon interviews, manual records, and patient reconstruction rather than computerized databases. The caller remained a ghost. No clear identity emerged. That uncertainty fueled competing theories almost immediately. Perhaps the source had genuinely intended to meet Don but fled after noticing suspicious activity. Perhaps the caller had never existed except as bait designed to lure him into the parking lot. Perhaps someone pretending to be an informant had manipulated every step from the beginning. Each possibility carried different implications. None could yet be proven. Inside the newsroom of the Arizona Republic, the emotional impact deepened as the hours passed. Don's desk remained exactly as he had left it. His notes were still stacked neatly. A coffee cup sat untouched beside folders containing investigations now viewed through an entirely different lens. Editors gathered around conference tables, struggling to balance two responsibilities that suddenly seemed inseparable. They had to report the story accurately. They also had to confront the reality that one of their own reporters had become the victim. Some journalists quietly wondered whether they should continue pursuing the investigations Don had left unfinished. Others questioned whether doing so might expose additional reporters to danger. The conversation reflected something few had ever seriously considered. Could asking questions become a death sentence? At Good Samaritan Hospital, Don's condition remained critical. The initial surgeries had kept him alive, but the battle was far from over. His body had endured extraordinary trauma. Every passing hour brought new complications that physicians anticipated but could never fully control. Infection, organ failure, shock. The medical team refused to surrender hope. Neither did Don. Although heavily medicated and drifting in and out of consciousness, there were moments when he attempted to communicate. Nurses later recalled his remarkable determination. Even after injuries that should have overwhelmed every instinct to survive, he continued fighting. Those closest to him recognized the same quiet persistence that had defined his career. He had never been a man who gave up easily. Now that determination had become intensely personal. Outside the hospital, police maintained a constant presence. Not because they expected another attack, but because they understood the significance of the victim. Reporters from across the country began arriving in Phoenix. Questions poured into police headquarters. Was organized crime responsible? Was the bombing connected to Don's investigations? Had he received threats? Did investigators have suspects? Officials answered cautiously. It was too early for conclusions. Evidence was still being gathered. Witnesses continued to be interviewed. Every statement required verification. Yet behind those carefully measured public comments, detectives privately acknowledged the same disturbing reality. This was unlike any homicide Phoenix had investigated in years. It combined meticulous planning with an unmistakable message. Someone had not merely wanted Don Bolles dead. Someone had wanted everyone who investigated powerful interests to understand exactly what could happen when certain questions were asked too persistently. As darkness settled over the city, the scorched parking space at the Clarendon Hotel remained illuminated by portable lights. Crime scene technicians continued their work long after most residents had gone home. The twisted remains of the Chevrolet sat silently within the secured perimeter. It no longer resembled a vehicle. It resembled evidence. Evidence that would eventually lead investigators toward bomb maker John Harvey Adamson. Evidence that would trigger one of the longest and most controversial murder investigations in Arizona history. Evidence that, despite decades of prosecutions, appeals, overturned convictions, and renewed investigations, would never fully answer the single question lingering over the blackened pavement. Who had truly ordered Don Bolles to die? The investigation entered its first full day beneath an atmosphere unlike anything Phoenix law enforcement had experienced in years. Detectives arrived before sunrise carrying boxes of reports, photographs, and evidence collected from the Clarendon Hotel parking lot. The conference room assigned to the case quickly filled with maps, witness statements, enlarged crime scene photographs, and handwritten timelines stretching across entire walls. Coffee cups accumulated beside stacks of legal pads as investigators prepared for what they already suspected would become one of the most demanding homicide investigations in Arizona history. The bombing had accomplished something beyond the attempted murder of a single man. It had created urgency. Pressure arrived from every direction. The governor wanted answers. City officials demanded progress. Newspapers across the country placed the attack on their front pages. Television crews remained outside police headquarters throughout the day, hoping an investigator might reveal even the smallest breakthrough. Inside the task force, however, confidence was tempered by experience. Bombings rarely produced quick solutions. Unlike crimes committed in moments of anger, This attack appeared carefully organized. Whoever planned it had likely anticipated the investigation long before the explosion occurred. They may have taken deliberate steps to eliminate witnesses, obscure financial connections, or distance themselves from the individual who physically placed the device beneath Don Bowles' car. Every possibility had to remain open. The first objective was reconstruction. Detectives carefully retraced Don's final 48 hours. Where had he gone? Who had he met? Which telephone calls had he received? Who knew about the meeting at the Clarendon Hotel? Secretaries, editors, colleagues, friends, family members, confidential sources, every conversation became relevant. Investigators quickly discovered that Don's schedule reflected the complicated life of an investigative reporter. Meetings frequently appeared with only first names or initials. Telephone numbers filled the margins of notebooks without explanation. Some appointments had never been entered into any calendar at all. This was perfectly ordinary journalism. Unfortunately, it created extraordinary challenges for detectives. Many of Don's confidential sources had expected anonymity. Some immediately disappeared after learning about the bombing. Others refused to speak with police, fearing exposure or retaliation. Several agreed to cooperate only after lengthy discussions about protecting their identities. As detectives interviewed one source after another, a consistent picture slowly emerged. Don had been pursuing stories involving politically sensitive land transactions, business relationships, influential developers, rumors of organized crime expanding its financial interests into Arizona. None of those subjects identified a killer. Together, however, they dramatically expanded the list of individuals who might have viewed his reporting as dangerous. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued examining the remains of the Chevrolet. The damaged vehicle was transported to a secure facility where investigators painstakingly dismantled it piece by piece. Nothing escaped examination. The underside of the chassis. The shattered driver's seat. Fragments embedded inside the frame. Specialists searched for anything capable of revealing how the bomb had been constructed or attached. Every recovered component underwent laboratory analysis. Explosives experts examined chemical residue. Metallurgists studied deformation patterns created by the blast. Engineers reconstructed the direction of the explosion using measurements collected at the crime scene. Gradually, technical conclusions became clearer. The bomb had not been improvised at the last moment. It demonstrated planning, competence, experience. Someone had invested considerable effort into ensuring maximum destruction. The device appeared specifically designed to kill the driver while minimizing damage beyond the immediate target. That finding reinforced another troubling conclusion. This was almost certainly a contract killing rather than an impulsive act. Someone had commissioned the attack. Someone had supplied resources. Someone had expected professional execution. Investigators turned increasing attention toward the anonymous telephone call arranging the hotel meeting. Telephone company records were requested. Operators were interviewed. Every available lead concerning the call's origin received immediate priority. Technology offered frustratingly limited assistance. Unlike modern digital communication, tracing calls in 1976 often required painstaking manual analysis, assuming sufficient records even existed. The caller remained unidentified. That absence only deepened suspicion. Detectives developed competing theories. Perhaps the anonymous caller genuinely intended to provide information but unknowingly led Don into danger. Perhaps the caller participated willingly in the conspiracy. Perhaps another individual had impersonated a confidential source solely to lure the journalist into a predictable location. Each possibility generated different investigative paths. Teams pursued all of them simultaneously. While detectives examined evidence, another battle continued inside Good Samaritan Hospital. Don remained alive. His survival transformed the investigation. Every physician understood that if his condition improved sufficiently, investigators might eventually question him directly. Even limited information could alter the course of the case. Who had telephoned him? What exactly had the caller promised? Had Don suspected anyone before arriving at the hotel? Did he recognize names connected to the attack? Police maintained regular contact with hospital staff, hoping for an opportunity to conduct even the briefest interview. Doctors consistently delivered the same answer. Not yet. His condition remained too unstable. Medical treatment took precedence over criminal investigation. Detectives waited. Across Phoenix, speculation intensified. Rumors spread through business circles. Political offices. Restaurants. Country clubs. Some insisted organized crime had finally imported Chicago-style violence into Arizona. Others argued the bombing reflected personal revenge unrelated to Don's journalism. Still others whispered names that investigators had already encountered during confidential interviews. Very little could be confirmed. Almost everything remained conjecture. That uncertainty complicated the investigation. False tips flooded police headquarters. Anonymous callers offered conflicting stories. Some genuinely wished to help. Others appeared motivated by personal grudges, political rivalries, or the opportunity to redirect attention toward innocent individuals. Experienced detectives recognized the danger. High-profile investigations often generated more misinformation than evidence. Every lead demanded verification. Every accusation required corroboration. Long hours produced frequent dead ends. Witnesses remembered details differently. Timelines shifted. Descriptions conflicted. The task force advanced cautiously, determined not to mistake coincidence for proof. Then another pattern began attracting attention. Several interviews suggested that Don's recent reporting had focused increasingly upon one particular network of business relationships connected to land development and influential political figures. The information remained incomplete. Names surfaced repeatedly but without sufficient evidence to justify arrests. Still, investigators sensed they were moving gradually toward the center of something much larger than a single bombing. This case was beginning to resemble a web rather than a straight line. Each new thread connected unexpectedly to another. Business records led toward political donors. Political donors led toward developers. Developers intersected with individuals rumored to maintain associations with organized crime. Nothing yet established criminal responsibility. But the connections refused to disappear. As evening approached, detectives reviewed the growing evidence board covering nearly an entire wall. Photographs. Maps. Telephone records. Witness statements. Financial documents. Dozens of names connected by handwritten lines. Some circles contained only question marks. Others carried notations reading, verify, re-interview, or possible link. The board reflected the investigation perfectly. An expanding picture filled with fragments that almost, but not quite, formed a complete image. Somewhere inside that maze of connections stood the individual who had ordered a bomb placed beneath Don Bowles' car. The challenge lay in proving it before the trail grew cold. As the days passed, the investigation settled into a relentless rhythm of interviews, paperwork, and frustration. Every morning began with optimism. Every evening ended with another stack of unanswered questions. The task force grew steadily larger. Detectives from Phoenix worked alongside investigators from state agencies and federal partners, each bringing different expertise to a case that refused to fit neatly into a single category. It involved homicide, explosives, organized crime, political corruption, financial fraud, and the dangerous intersection where all of those worlds appeared to overlap. One team focused entirely on the bomb. Another retraced Don Bowles' professional activities over the previous year. Others followed financial records connected to land deals that had attracted his attention. No effort seemed too extensive. Still, progress came painfully slowly. One of the greatest obstacles was determining motive. On paper, Don had investigated dozens of influential individuals over the course of his career. He had questioned developers, businessmen, public officials, and people rumored to have ties to organized crime. Any one of those investigations might have angered someone powerful. The problem was that anger alone did not explain a car bomb. Building such a device required planning, resources, and confidence that the attack could be carried out without immediate detection. This was not a spontaneous crime. Someone had invested time into making sure it succeeded. Detectives therefore began asking a different question. Who had both the motive and the ability? That subtle shift changed the direction of the investigation. Attention increasingly turned toward individuals known to associate with professional criminals rather than merely influential businessmen. Informants who had once provided intelligence on gambling operations, loan sharking, and organized crime were quietly contacted again. Some refused to cooperate. Others hinted that they had heard conversations after the bombing, whispers suggesting that certain people had celebrated rather than mourned the attack. None of the information could yet be verified. But the atmosphere surrounding the case was changing. Fear had become unmistakable. Several potential witnesses requested anonymity before agreeing to speak. One insisted on meeting detectives outside the city after dark. Another cancelled twice before finally appearing. A third spoke only briefly, constantly glancing toward the windows as though expecting someone to be watching. Experienced investigators recognized that behavior. People were frightened. Not merely of testifying. They feared surviving long enough to testify. Meanwhile, forensic analysts continued extracting every possible clue from the destroyed Chevrolet. Laboratory reports gradually confirmed earlier suspicions. The explosive device had been carefully assembled using commercially available components combined with enough technical knowledge to maximize destructive force. The wiring demonstrated deliberate workmanship rather than amateur experimentation. Someone familiar with explosives had almost certainly built it. That conclusion narrowed the field only slightly. Arizona contained no shortage of individuals with military backgrounds, construction experience, mining knowledge, or criminal expertise involving explosives. The bomb itself refused to identify its maker. Back at the hospital, Don Bowles remained the silent center of the entire investigation. His survival continued astonishing both doctors and detectives. Despite repeated surgeries, overwhelming blood loss, and severe trauma, he fought through one critical day after another. Hospital staff spoke quietly about his determination. Nurses who cared for him later recalled a man who seemed unwilling to surrender despite suffering beyond ordinary comprehension. Detectives waited patiently for permission to interview him. Doctors remained cautious. Every conversation risked exhausting a patient whose body had already endured extraordinary strain. The investigation therefore continued without its most important witness. That absence became increasingly painful. Some questions only Don could answer. How much had he already learned? Whom had he trusted? Had he suspected danger before arriving at the Clarendon Hotel? Those answers remained trapped behind hospital doors. At police headquarters, detectives revisited the anonymous telephone call once again. They refused to let it fade into the background. The meeting had been the final link in the chain. Without the call, Don never would have driven to the hotel. Without the meeting, the bomb might never have found its target. Every investigator understood that the caller, whether conspirator or unwitting participant, occupied a pivotal role. Telephone company employees assisted as much as the technology of the era allowed. Records were examined manually. Possible connections were explored one by one. Public telephones, private residences, businesses, all became part of an expanding effort to identify the voice that had persuaded Don to leave his newsroom that morning. Days passed. Nothing definitive emerged. The caller remained unknown. The frustration was beginning to show. Detectives frequently returned to the evidence board, adding new names while reluctantly crossing out others. Promising leads collapsed after careful verification. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Timelines shifted. Some individuals possessed convincing motives but airtight alibis. Others had opportunity but no apparent connection to Don's investigations. The web continued expanding. Yet the center remained hidden. Outside official channels, another conversation quietly spread throughout Arizona. Journalists were asking questions of their own. Many had known Don personally. Others admired his work from a distance. Regardless of their relationship, nearly all recognized the dangerous precedent created by the bombing. If a reporter investigating corruption could be assassinated in broad daylight, what did that mean for everyone else pursuing similar stories? Some editors privately advised reporters to exercise greater caution. Others insisted the opposite. Backing away now would reward whoever had ordered the attack. Within newsrooms across the country, the case ceased being merely another homicide. It became symbolic. An attack not simply on a man, but on investigative journalism itself. That realization placed additional pressure upon law enforcement. Failure to solve the crime would resonate far beyond Phoenix. It would suggest that sophisticated political violence could silence reporters without consequence. No investigator wanted that outcome. Late one evening, after another exhausting review of witness interviews and forensic reports, a detective paused before the evidence board. Photographs covered nearly every available space. Maps of Phoenix. Telephone records. Business connections. Crime scene images. Names connected by arrows and handwritten notes. The board no longer resembled a homicide investigation. It resembled an intricate map of influence stretching through Arizona's political and financial landscape. The detective quietly observed one unsettling pattern. Certain names kept appearing. Not because evidence proved their involvement. Because too many independent pieces of information pointed in their direction. Separate witnesses mentioned them. Financial records touched them. Business relationships circled back to them. None of it yet constituted proof. But investigators had learned long ago to respect patterns. Patterns often reached the truth before evidence caught up. The task force agreed upon a new strategy. Rather than chasing isolated tips, they would concentrate on individuals repeatedly emerging from unrelated sources. It was a subtle but significant shift. For the first time since the bombing, the investigation was beginning to narrow. Somewhere within that shrinking circle was a man named John Harvey Adamson. At that moment, however, his name occupied only a small space inside a detective's notebook. No one in the room yet realized that it would soon dominate the largest murder investigation Arizona had ever seen. The breakthrough did not arrive with flashing lights or a dramatic confession. It emerged the way many major investigations do, with small, seemingly unrelated pieces of information that refused to disappear. Weeks had passed since the explosion at the Clarendon Hotel. The scorched parking space had long been cleaned. News cameras had moved on to other stories. Phoenix had resumed its familiar rhythm on the surface. Beneath that appearance of normalcy, however, the investigation had become more focused than ever. The task force no longer chased every rumor equally. Instead, detectives concentrated on recurring names. Individuals who appeared in multiple interviews. People connected through separate business relationships. Men whose reputations quietly surfaced whenever conversations turned toward organized crime, gambling interests, or questionable land deals. One name began appearing with increasing frequency. John Harvey Adamson. At first, the references seemed insignificant. An informant mentioned him casually while discussing criminal associates. Another witness recalled seeing him with individuals already known to investigators. Separate intelligence reports linked him to circles where violence could be purchased as readily as loyalty. None of it established guilt. But detectives had learned that when enough independent sources pointed toward the same individual, the coincidence deserved careful attention. They began assembling everything they could find. Adamson's background. His known associates. Financial history. Prior criminal activity. Telephone contacts. Travel records. The picture that emerged differed sharply from Don Bowles' quiet, methodical life. Adamson moved comfortably through a world where legitimate business frequently overlapped with criminal opportunity. He knew people who solved problems discreetly. He possessed connections extending into gambling operations and organized criminal networks. Most importantly, investigators believed he had access to individuals capable of constructing or obtaining explosive devices. Still, suspicion alone solved nothing. The detectives needed evidence. Real evidence. Not rumors whispered across bar tables or confidential tips impossible to verify in court. Surveillance quietly intensified. Investigators reviewed earlier witness statements searching specifically for Adamson's name. Old interview transcripts suddenly revealed details previously overlooked. One witness remembered seeing him in the company of another individual connected to Arizona's business community. Another recalled conversations suggesting money had changed hands shortly before the bombing. Each fragment remained incomplete. Yet together they formed the outline of something larger. The investigation gradually shifted from broad exploration toward deliberate concentration. Meanwhile, Don Bowles continued fighting for his life inside Good Samaritan Hospital. Doctors performed additional surgeries. Complications developed exactly as they had feared. The human body can endure astonishing trauma, but catastrophic injuries often create battles extending far beyond the operating room. Infection threatened. Circulatory problems persisted. Every improvement was followed by another crisis. Family members lived inside an exhausting cycle of hope and fear. Reporters gathered outside the hospital each day waiting for medical updates. Across Arizona, thousands followed every announcement. The bombing had become deeply personal for journalists nationwide. Many recognized themselves in Don. They understood confidential meetings, anonymous telephone calls, late-night investigations, quiet persistence. If such work could lead to an assassination, no investigative reporter could ignore the implications. Inside police headquarters, detectives reviewed Adamson's activities with increasing intensity. Financial investigators searched for unusual transactions. Telephone records were compared against known associates. Confidential informants received renewed attention. One particular source offered information investigators found difficult to dismiss. According to the account, conversations had circulated within criminal circles suggesting that the bombing had not been ordered by the individual who physically carried it out. Someone else had supplied money. Someone else had wanted Don eliminated. Adamson, if involved at all, might have served as only one piece of a much larger conspiracy. That possibility aligned disturbingly well with the evidence already collected. The sophistication of the bombing suggested organization rather than impulse. Professional planning. Professional execution. Professional distance between those giving orders and those carrying them out. Detectives recognized the familiar structure. If the conspiracy resembled other organized criminal operations, proving responsibility would become extraordinarily difficult. Those financing violent crimes rarely handled explosives themselves. Those placing bombs often claimed ignorance regarding ultimate motives. Every layer insulated the one above it. Breaking that chain required patience and pressure. Investigators therefore adopted another strategy. Rather than immediately attempting to prove murder, they searched for weaknesses. Outstanding warrants. Financial inconsistencies. Associates willing to cooperate. Minor offenses capable of opening larger conversations. Experienced detectives understood that major conspiracies often collapsed because someone involved eventually feared prison more than loyalty. The challenge lay in identifying that person. As surveillance continued, Adamson's name appeared again. Then again. Every new report strengthened investigators' belief that he occupied an important position within the growing web of relationships surrounding the case. Still, no direct evidence placed him beneath Don Bowles' Chevrolet. No witness claimed to have seen him install the bomb. No forensic examination identified fingerprints capable of surviving the explosion. The investigation remained frustratingly incomplete. Then another development altered its course. Don Bowles died. After 11 days of extraordinary medical effort, the injuries inflicted by the explosion finally proved overwhelming. The announcement spread across Arizona within minutes. Inside the Arizona Republic, silence settled over the newsroom. Typewriters stopped. Telephones continued ringing, but many reporters simply stared at their desks. The hope that Don might someday identify those responsible had disappeared forever. The investigation officially transformed from attempted murder into homicide. For detectives, grief quickly merged with renewed determination. The victim could no longer testify. That responsibility now belonged entirely to evidence. The funeral drew journalists from across the United States. Many attended not merely to honor Don, but to demonstrate something larger. They refused to allow intimidation to define investigative reporting. Among conversations taking place during those difficult days, one idea gradually gained momentum. If one reporter had been murdered while pursuing corruption, perhaps dozens of reporters should continue exactly where he had been forced to stop. That idea would soon become the Arizona Project. But before journalists united, detectives still faced the same immediate challenge. Find the people responsible. As pressure mounted following Don's death, investigators intensified efforts surrounding John Harvey Adamson. The evidence remained circumstantial. The suspicions remained substantial. Somewhere within the expanding collection of interviews, financial records, and confidential intelligence, detectives believed the missing connection already existed. They simply had not recognized it yet. They continued searching, unaware that the breakthrough they desperately needed would not come from another piece of forensic evidence. It would come from the people inside the conspiracy itself. Conspiracies built on secrecy often appear unbreakable from the outside. Everyone involved has a reason to remain silent. Money. Fear. Loyalty. Self-preservation. For investigators, the greatest challenge is rarely identifying the people who may have committed the crime. The greater challenge is persuading one of them to speak before the others realize that silence is no longer in their best interest. That principle slowly began to shape the strategy of the task force. By now, detectives had accumulated hundreds of interviews, thousands of pages of reports, and a growing collection of intelligence gathered from confidential informants. Individually, many pieces of information seemed weak. Together, however, they pointed repeatedly toward the same circle of associates. John Harvey Adamson remained at its center. Investigators increased the pressure carefully. Rather than confronting him immediately with accusations they could not yet prove, they continued examining every aspect of his life. His business dealings, his acquaintances, his financial difficulties, his movements before and after the bombing. Every inconsistency was documented. Experienced detectives understood that people living complicated lives often left behind trails they never expected investigators to connect. Eventually, one trail began standing out. Adamson's relationships extended beyond ordinary business contacts into circles already familiar to law enforcement. Several of those associates had reputations for violence, intimidation, and organized criminal activity. Their names surfaced repeatedly in intelligence reports collected long before Don Bolles had ever been attacked. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. This was no longer simply an investigation into one bombing. It was becoming an investigation into an entire network. The detectives knew they needed someone from inside that network. Without an insider, the conspiracy might remain nothing more than a collection of suspicious coincidences. Then the pressure began producing cracks. As investigators pursued separate criminal matters involving Adamson, they found opportunities to question him under circumstances unrelated to the bombing. Every interview became another chance to observe his reactions, compare his answers with existing evidence, and measure how much he believed the authorities actually knew. At first, he denied any involvement. His responses remained controlled, carefully worded. He distanced himself from the investigation, portraying himself as another man whose name had been unfairly pulled into a high-profile case. But experienced interrogators noticed something subtle. His confidence shifted depending on the subject. Certain names produced almost no reaction. Others caused noticeable hesitation. Tiny pauses. Brief changes in tone. A glance toward the table before answering. None of those behaviors proved guilt. Yet they suggested something important. There were subjects he preferred not to discuss. Investigators continued applying pressure over time, recognizing that major conspiracies rarely collapsed during a single interrogation. People changed. Circumstances changed. Fear changed. Months of uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone connected to the case. Eventually, Adamson faced legal pressures of his own. The possibility of spending years behind bars forced him to reconsider loyalties that once appeared unshakable. It was then that the investigation experienced the breakthrough detectives had pursued for so long. Adamson agreed to talk. Not all at once. Not dramatically. The first conversations were cautious. Fragmented. Investigators understood they were dealing with a man whose credibility would always require careful verification. Every statement had to be tested against independent evidence. Every claim demanded corroboration. Still, the information he provided fundamentally changed the direction of the case. Adamson admitted involvement in the bombing. According to his account, he had not acted alone. He claimed he had been hired. The assassination, he alleged, had been arranged as a contract killing rather than a spontaneous act of violence. Those words transformed the investigation overnight. Detectives immediately shifted into verification mode. They compared Adamson's statements against crime scene evidence, against witness interviews, against telephone records, against financial information gathered over previous months. Some details matched remarkably well. Others required additional investigation. Most importantly, Adamson identified two men whom he claimed had orchestrated the murder. Max Dunlap, James Robison. Both names were already known to investigators through separate lines of inquiry. Neither had emerged from nowhere. That fact strengthened the importance of Adamson's account, though it did not automatically guarantee its truth. Detectives understood the risks. Cooperating witnesses sometimes minimized their own responsibility while exaggerating the involvement of others. Every incentive existed for Adamson to negotiate the most favorable outcome possible. His testimony alone could never be enough. Investigators therefore began building independent cases against the newly identified suspects. Financial transactions were reviewed again. Witnesses were re-interviewed. Old statements acquired new meaning when viewed through the framework Adamson had described. Gradually, prosecutors became convinced that sufficient evidence existed to move forward. Arrests followed. The announcement sent shockwaves through Arizona. For the first time since the bombing, the public saw identifiable suspects accused of participating in the assassination of Don Bolles. Many believed justice was finally within reach. Newspapers carried photographs of the accused across their front pages. Television stations devoted extensive coverage to every court appearance. Yet beneath the optimism, experienced investigators remained cautious. They knew the road ahead would be extraordinarily difficult. Complex conspiracy cases rarely ended with arrests. They entered a different battlefield. The courtroom. Defense attorneys immediately attacked Adamson's credibility. Why should anyone believe a confessed participant in the crime? Had he altered his story to save himself? Was he telling the truth, or simply providing prosecutors with names they wanted to hear? Those questions would dominate the legal proceedings that followed. Even within the investigative team, there remained an awareness that the case had not answered every mystery. If Adamson's account was accurate, why had the murder been ordered? Who ultimately benefited from Don Bolles' death? Had the conspiracy ended with the individuals already identified, or were they themselves acting on behalf of someone even more powerful? Those questions lingered in the background as prosecutors prepared for trial. Outside the courtroom, another remarkable development was taking shape. Journalists from across the United States had reached their own conclusion. If the purpose of the bombing had been to silence Don Bolles' investigations, then allowing his unfinished work to disappear would hand victory to those responsible. Instead, dozens of investigative reporters chose the opposite path. They gathered in Phoenix. They opened Don's files. They compared notes. They began pursuing the very leads that someone had tried so violently to bury. The effort became known as the Arizona Project. It was unlike anything American journalism had attempted before. 38 investigative reporters from competing news organizations worked together instead of against one another. Their message was unmistakable. One reporter could be murdered. The truth could not. While prosecutors assembled their case against Adamson, Dunlap, and Robison, another investigation had quietly begun outside the justice system itself. It would ensure that Don Bolles' notebook did not close with his final heartbeat. Instead, it became the starting point for one of the most influential collaborative investigations in the history of American journalism.